What do the most successful, growing businesses have in common? They're working together in Slack. Slack is where work happens, with all your people, data, and information in one AI-powered place. Grow your business in Slack. Visit slack.com to get started.
I'm Inc. Executive Editor Diana Ransom.
And I'm Editor-at-Large Christine Lagorio-Chafkin.
And you're listening to From the Ground Up. Today's episode, Demand Shocks. You can do all the planning in the world to set up a successful supply chain. And obviously, things can go wrong. But also, what if things go well? What if they go too well?
Right. What if that TikTok video you made goes viral and all of a sudden you have more orders than products?
So we talked to two founders who had this problem. Justine Tu, the co-founder of The Woobles, which makes crochet kits, and Laura Modi, who's the co-founder and CEO of baby formula company Bobbie. We wanted to hear about their experiences meeting a sudden surge in demand.
Yes, and it was illuminating to hear how they handled it. One was an internal manufacturing issue that could only be solved through trial and error, while the other was addressing a massive national product shortage.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Laura, congratulations on baby number 4.
Oh, thank you.
We're just I'm in awe of you. Jesus.
Well, I'm delighted to be here and not with 4 children right now.
Right. No, that's great. And thanks for making time for this. So the point of today is to essentially go on a deep dive on meeting sudden demand shocks. You both have had firsthand experience with meeting sudden demand, so I'd love to kind of, hear a little bit more about your experience. Justine, let's actually start with you. So with Woobles, it was born out of the pandemic, and, you had this idea to create these crochet animal creatures. I'm going to probably butcher the name of this. Amigurumi? Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it? Okay, great.
Yep.
So you made these amigurumi kits, and they were wildly popular, but you ran into a manufacturing snag. Can you talk about what happened?
Yeah. So I made this company with my husband back in 2020, July 2020. We make learn to crochet kits for complete beginners, and it was getting really popular. So we were like, all right, we cannot keep up with the demand by physically making it ourselves. So then we attempted to get them made in China. And given our backgrounds previously having only done essentially desk jobs at a computer and having zero experience in manufacturing, we were like, oh, we can just tell people in written form, maybe some videos. And of course, the product will come back totally, completely correct. And the thing with our kits is that they're actually all pre-started for you. They all have what's called a magic ring in the beginning, because that's the most difficult part for a beginner to learn. The big snafu is that a human needs to crochet that. And the people that we work with know how to crochet, but there's lots of different ways that you can create a magic ring. And we thought if we just send them a video showing them how we do it, it'll be totally fine. Fast forward, a week before Black Friday, which is the biggest, busiest time of the year, tens of thousands of kits, probably at that point, maybe around 10,000 kits arrive, and all of the magic rings are incorrect. Oh. And so that meant that me, my mom, my mother-in-law spent the next few weeks opening every package, redoing every magic ring, packaging it back up.
So obviously that was a significant issue, and you had to literally fix all these magic rings by hand. So at what point, did you have a ton of orders, or, what actually happened with the consumers and customers, and how did you handle it with them?
Yeah, we did have a ton of orders. It's the peak season gifting, because our product is very giftable.
Oh, I've heard about Black Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, being a very busy time of year for many businesses that sell things that people want. So yeah, we were constantly just making things in time to ship them out. In those days, my husband and I and my father-in-law shipped out every single package every single day. And so it would just be I'd come hot off of crocheting magic loops, and it's we just have enough to ship out for that day for the rest of the year, basically. So the good side is, it did help us have enough kits to be able to sell. The downside being we had to recrochet every single one.
That's amazing. Laura, you also faced a similar crush, but dissimilar as the sort of the origin of the crush. Can you talk about what Bobbie is, and also describe what happened to you in 2022?
I hear 2022 and I almost get PTSD just remembering back to that moment.
I believe
Ooh,
it.
It was, well, I make infant formula. And you don't even need to have been a mother, a parent. Everyone and their grandmother in 2022 had heard about the infant formula shortage. You couldn't change the news channel without hearing, some elected official, usually the president of the United States, talking about the fact that America wasn't able to feed babies. And it was a shock to the industry and a major shock to our business because we were only in market for about 12 months before it happened. So, we often say you're either in the right place at the right time, but in that moment, it felt like we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was, it was a huge shock to the business. And I would say it probably changed the trajectory of everything in how we run the company, the growth we had seen, and a lot of decisions that came afterwards.
Right. So you and your co-founder, Sarah, you both were mothers basically starting this company. So you were, I guess, you kind of anticipated growing the company organically, I imagine, really calmly growing the business. And then next thing you know, whammo, you have to deal with the crisis on of ridiculous proportions. So what did you actually have to do at that point?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know what you're going to expect when it comes to growth, but I did not expect that the industry would disrupt itself, which is essentially what happened. We came into it and we said, we're going to disrupt this industry. It hasn't changed in the guts of 40 or 50 years, and we want to be the company that changes that. But like any company disrupting something, you're up against a million hurdles. What we hadn't expected was that one morning we would wake up and it would be disrupting itself. What we found was that overnight, our customer count doubled. So we were steady growth. Infant formula in many ways is predictable. It's repeatable. And we woke up and we saw our customer count double. And then it happened again the next day and over the next week. And for most startups, in many ways, you're looking at that growth trajectory and you're going, this is fantastic. This is exactly what you'd want. However, we had to remember that because we were an essential good, running out of infant formula and growing too fast was actually the worst problem to have. And I'll never forget, and again, this is where the PTSD comes in. My head of growth came to me and she said, Laura, we have a pretty big problem. We're growing faster than our ability to replenish product. And if we keep growing at this rate, we're not going to have enough product to serve the current Bobby subscribers who've already come onto the platform. And becoming a mother or being a mother in that moment, you make the decision as a mother, not as a CEO, not as a business leader. And I remember her saying, we have to decide to close down our website or we will run out of product. And that day we closed it down. And we stopped growing. We chose our current customers over growing the business.
So you had noted that you had realized that this was a product with a supply and a demand that you could predict. Babies need X amount of formula every month. And so you built in a subscription model so that you had this steady customer base that you could really rely on going forward. And then you kind of had to make a difficult decision saying, okay, we can't allow new signups at this moment. How long did that last? And how did you then manage to scale up?
I remember at the time, you really have no idea how long it's going to last. So we were trying to model and forecast the business, thinking this might go on for 2 weeks, it may go on for 2 months. It was 7 months. For 7 months, we had to close down our website and we made a guarantee to our current subscribers that we wouldn't run out of product on them. And in fact, we became the only company in 2022 that didn't run out of product on its customers. But we also didn't grow. So for that period of time, we just had this huge dip in our growth that we couldn't serve. And we built a large wait list of potential Bobby customers. And I know you guys are all parents on this call. I mean, it's not like you can wait. This isn't, a pantry product and you're hoping you get an email alert one day and that you're available. You need formula when you need it. So it was very challenging and disheartening being unable to serve all those potential Bobby customers.
So why couldn't you just produce more infant formula?
I know. The dreaded question, why couldn't we produce more? What we make, it's very challenging. We make the hardest, most regulated consumable for an infant. It is the sole nutrition for a baby. Being able to flip on manufacturing and just produce more, it takes many years to be able to open up new manufacturing, get it qualified, run the safety and quality and rigor to be able to put it out in the market. And that was one of the most dreaded questions, where it was like, just ramp up manufacturing, just do more. And we were running 24/7, producing as much as we could. And even still, we had to go out and we had to make a decision if we were going to expand capacity and build or buy manufacturing to be able to meet the demand.
Mm-hmm. But you had to also change your business model to some degree, right? Because you were because the infants that you were then caring for were on a plan. Each one had their own plan. And to scale up so dramatically would require kind of throwing the plan out the window, perhaps. I mean, so how did your business actually change in that period?
That was the introduction of what we now call our customer promise. And what we say is, when you subscribe to us, we subscribe to you. If you come in and you say, I want my baby to be fed this product, our responsibility is to make sure that we never run out. Here's the challenge, though. When you sign up, we may have 12 months that we now need to serve you. So what we can't do is go into debt on our product. So when we start producing product, we need to start forecasting 12 months out for anyone who signs up to make sure that we have enough product. And if we don't have enough, we create a seat model. And a seat model basically says that we will only allow 1,000, maybe 2,000 people to subscribe on a weekly basis if we find that our production schedule is going to slow down. But I need to give major props to our forecasting team, because it is a very, very challenging job to be able to forecast how much infant formula you're going to need over the course of 12 months. And we basically need to manage our subscription business every day according to how much production we'll have over a course of a year.
I had this memory flashback of our refrigerator at home breaking while I had a freezer full of breast milk.
Oh.
And it was like, no! We went around to the neighbors and gave them my breast milk to put in their freezer. It's the most awkward point in my life. But yeah, I can only imagine what it's like to run out of, food for your child. So it must be harrowing. Justine, back to you for a minute here. You were talking about the magic rings earlier. That wasn't the only crisis your company has had to face. Can you talk a little bit about other potential? I think there was an issue with the implement for the dinosaur.
Yeah, the stitch markers. Yeah. I feel like, our issues don't compare at all to Laura's. As a new mom, I got to say thank you so much for, caring and committing to your existing customers that much. So another issue that popped up, there have been many issues, but the one that you're specifically referring to is what we call the stitch marker incident. A stitch marker is basically a plastic safety pin that helps people see where they need to crochet next, where the beginning of what a round is called, a round or a row in crochet is. And we use those to teach complete beginners how to know where to put their hook for the next, for the first few stitches that they ever crochet. And so because of this whole magic ring debacle, all our QC efforts went into making sure that the magic ring was correct. And we were like, of course, there's not going to be a problem with the stitch markers are the littlest of things in the kit itself. So we overlooked that. So maybe a year later, a few months to a year later, we were proudly transitioning all of our kits to have what we call easy peasy yarn. It's yarn that we've made that can't fray or split, so it's easier to work with when you learn how to crochet. And it's very clear how to see your stitches. And so doing that means you rebrand the kits. It goes from this canvas bag into this nice professional plastic bag where you can see what you're going to make. And in that whole escapade, we're slowly transitioning different characters, one of them being the dinosaur, which is one of our top sellers. So we sent out this email announcing, hooray, everybody, the dinosaur, Fred the Dino, is now available in easy peasy yarn. Everyone's like, hooray, I'm going to get that. And again, me and my husband packing every single shipment at that time, start just opening some of the packages right before we're literally putting them in the bags to send off to customers to check them as just be are the magic rings still good? in that escapade, I think I just happened to want to move one of the stitch markers because I saw one of them was in the wrong place. And then it just dissolved in my hands. And I was like, oh no. And I was like, is this just this kit or is it every kit? And then we proceed to like go through boxes and it's all of the kits. And so now it's like, great, we've already sold all these products. We've already like made this big launch announcement. Everyone loves it, but these stitch markers are totally broken. And like,
so what happened and what did you do?
Our guess at what happened after we like called up the manufacturer and discussed all this is that something about like transitioning it, like moving it across, like by plane, by boat, perhaps the temperature drop is what made the plastic fragile. And so by the time it came to the US, it was breaking. But again, it was another one of those situations where it's like, it's a physical product. We don't have that many options other than, guess we gotta go sit down and do it.
No.
And at this point, we engaged with more than just me and my mom and my mother-in-law, but still it was like, there's a lot more kits at this point. And it's, again, very tedious to like open every single kit, replace the stitch markers, close it up, and then ship it.
At that point, how many had you sold? How many of the Fred Dinos had you sold?
I don't remember. Probably thousands would be my guess.
Oh my God.
And it was yet again another situation of like, we're just barely meeting. Like we fix enough kits to sell that day for months.
So you actually did manage to supply the products to your customers, right? Did you have to delay shipments at all?
Probably in the initial batch when we were like, what is going on? And trying to figure out how to solve it, we had to delay it for a few days. But luckily we didn't have to like do any sort of weeks long type of delay.
Had you at that point sort of identified a backup manufacturer? So in the off chance that something like that, like the magic ring were to be wrong again, you'd have a backup?
That would be pretty smart of us to do. We were just like, nah, let's just QC this more. For the stitch markers, though, we were like, we need to find other factories who can supply this and test a bunch of them. So like we started exploring, like, should we actually use a completely different shape of the stitch marker? Like, because we didn't know what was causing it. Because like we don't have chemical science backgrounds. We didn't know how to analyze the plastic composition of it. And so it just became a situation of, let's just get samples from a lot of different factories, change up the material. Maybe it's the color. It was always just like the green ones that were falling apart, not the orange ones.
Oh, that's so frustrating.
So we were just like, let's just explore every single option and then test them all, ship them over, like expose them to the cold, to the heat and things like that to figure out what to use next.
I mean, this is a question for both of you, really, is like, does anything prepare you for this experience?
I don't really think so. But what I do like to say is that I feel like running a business is like doing the user experience design cycle just applying it to a different thing. I guess that helped in that sense, where I very much have this mentality of like, we're never going to know everything. Just take your best, like do some research, take your best guess, try to prototype it as low cost and as fast as possible to get useful insight, and then just keep on making it better over and over again. And I feel like that's what running a business is like too.
Yeah. And Laura, you also didn't have a background necessarily in infant formula creation, right?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
CPG, food, nutrition, absolutely no background. But I always say the one experience I did have that was very similar was parenting. It's the only other job essentially where you have no experience in, you're responsible for someone's livelihood, you can't quit, and you have a million surprises coming at you every day. And I liken what we go through here in the company, and we're feeding millions of babies, and that responsibility and the surprises that you're met with every day, I think parenting comes close.
You can fire your customers, though. You can't fire your children.
You could. There's days I'm tempted, very tempted.
Well, that's amazing. So, I do think that there's a difference here, like in kind of the severity of a product being in like slightly incorrect, right? If the baby formula is not absolutely perfect, it cannot go out the door. If a stitch is missing, a customer might be okay with that, right? Like it's possible. there's maybe similar things, though, if you go back, like what advice would you have for yourself in setting up your supply chain, in getting a solid foundation from the start that sort of helps you in the future mitigate any kind of chance of these things happening? Like, what would you say to someone who's starting out in your industry or an adjacent one now?
I would do standard operating procedures, SOPs. You need to QC everything. Like, think through every little detail. No detail is too small. And definitely also try to make the mistakes early on. If we have an issue like that now at this scale, we're going to have to brute force it still, but it just, the cost of the company at the time, the impact would be so much bigger. So while it was unfortunate that these other issues did affect that many kits and took up like so much of my personal time and my mom and my mother-in-law, at least it was contained. And we were still small enough that we could still meet the demand with a mistake like that.
Yeah, Laura, what about you?
Two things come to mind. I think the first would be more redundancy. We relied heavily on single source supply chains, single source manufacturing. There was something about the simplicity and ease of being able to just worry about those one or two players that you had. When in hindsight, what we really needed was the resiliency to sustain a crisis. And you can't do that when you're single source. All of that said, you also need to believe in your growth, which is you need to go into it with confidence too. You don't want to overinvest, but balancing a little bit of that confidence in growth and then building out your operation to support it. And then I think the last thing I would definitely do, and I think we did very well, but I would reinforce it, is just more transparency to customers. There's a lot that happens behind the scenes, but we're living in a day where whatever happens in your supply chain and the SLAs that you've put out to your customers and the expectations on your service, that is something that they want transparency into. So I think we don't live in a day where supply chain is just back office. It's front of house now, and you got to communicate it.
You're a growing business, which means you need every spare hour you can find. That's why the most successful, growing businesses are working together in Slack. Slack is where work happens, with all your people, data, and information in one AI-powered place. Start a call instantly in huddles and ditch cumbersome calendar invites. Or build an automation with Workflow Builder to take routine tasks off your plate. No coding required. Grow your business in Slack. Visit slack.com to get started.
It's so funny. We talk to a lot of entrepreneurs here at Inc. And all of them, have had their kind of 15 minutes of fame. To some degree, it's like they went on Shark Tank, or maybe a TikTok video goes viral for one reason or another. So they have to deal with this sudden deluge of interest. Or even like Whole Foods agrees to put their product in, various regions, and then they have to magically overnight create product. And this is a good problem to have to some degree, but it's also kind of a crisis in its own right. I know I kind of asked this before. It was like, to what degree can you expect this? Someone puts out a crowdfunding campaign. Do they need to have all these, they need to have all their I's dotted and the T's crossed in advance of doing something like this? And what can they do in advance?
I think the advice I give, maybe I would say like the big asterisk, is in these times where we had those giant surges, I guess in the beginning, we're still making everything like personally. So there was some amount of we can just grind through it ourselves and help meet the demand. But given that we're a fully bootstrapped company, even though we have experienced high growth, we actually are afraid to double down too much, because that may put us at risk if we get too much inventory. I will say that we have constantly grown faster than we expect. So at some point it just becomes okay, I guess I kind of expect the unexpected, and this is status quo. And also having had one period where demand suddenly dropped, I definitely agree that it's a wonderful problem to have, to struggle to meet demand. Would much rather have that problem. I don't really feel like you can super prepare yourselves, other than what Laura was saying about having some redundancy. Maybe if you're manufacturing something not near where you are, manufacturing a little bit extra product and keeping it over there so that it's not taking up space in the US, so that maybe you have options to airship things really fast if you need to.
You've heard of postmortems and premortems. It's something we do a lot in the company now, which, we do pre-mortems for any major launch or push that we have in the business. Or it could be some change that we're seeing in the supply chain end of it. But one of the things we used to do too much was that our pre-mortems are always focused on what would go wrong. And you're in the room and you're picking holes and you're looking at all of the ways that this launch or this push is going to fail. And what we didn't do enough of was, what if it goes right? What if the growth is exceptional? What if there's a surge in demand because we're going on that morning show? And now we've gotten to the place where I think we have more confidence in our ability to execute and how to operationalize something. But we're walking into those pre-mortems and we're saying, great, let's spend the first half of it talking about what could go wrong. And then let's spend the rest of it saying, and if it goes right, what else are we going to be dealing with? And often the problems come with something being too good as well.
I wanted to ask you, speaking of things that go right to some degree, is the wait list that you developed at Bobbi. Maybe this isn't the best example of this, but I'd love to hear, what did you do with the wait list?
Oh, the wait list. Gosh, it just pains me. It pains me both as a mother and as a CEO. As a mother, you were watching these parents and they weren't just adding themselves to a wait list. They were adding themselves to a wait list and then sending love letters. I mean, essays. And these essays were, I'm 6 months pregnant. I've been following Bobbi. I want your product so badly for my first child. I will do anything it takes to get your product. So we're reading these love letters, and this is like, trying to get your kid into preschool type love letters. And it just breaks your heart knowing that you're unable to serve them. But we actually staffed up customer service and we said, even though they're not a customer, let's communicate with them. Let's stay in touch. The amount of times that we communicated one-on-one, or we posted a blog post about it, or we sent like a mass email and we let them know what our supply journey was, where it was at. We would often email the wait list and say, hey, we're going to start rolling people out in stages. And there's group A and group B and group C. And we would give them windows of when to expect to be invited in, take their name off the wait list. But I say all of that because it wasn't as simple as, oh, we got product, let's just email the whole wait list. We communicated with them over the 7 months of being turned off. And those expectation settings, I think, was the make or break in how we managed the relationship. And in the end, I'd say we were only able to get about 10% of those who joined the wait list actually on as a customer.
Well, I mean, to some degree, it's true that, people cycle out of needing your product, but they have more children. So you don't want to, ignore those people who happen to be on the wait list. So it sounds like a wise idea to have, welcomed them into the Bobbi continuum there. I've also heard of what Bobbi's working on socially speaking. So if you could talk a little bit about, what you're doing as the foundation.
I would say this is the DNA of the business, right? Like starting Bobbi was not I'm dying to make great powdered milk. That was a part of it. Making better infant formula to feed infants was a huge piece of it. But it was what infant formula was a symbol for everything else becoming apparent. The fact that there wasn't enough paid leave to be able to support the breastfeeding journey, that the same government who says, hey, by the way, mom, you should breastfeed for 6 months, was not giving you the time to be able to do so. Or the fact that there was no childcare support for that parent to be able to go back to work. There's a rise of the Black maternal mortality crisis. You look around what it means to become a child in America, to become a parent in America. There's many things broken. And maybe to our detriment, but we spend so much time looking at the society that surrounds feeding your baby and raising your child in America and focusing on those social issues. And it was actually during the shortage that we created Bobbi for Change. And Bobbi for Change was an internal effort. It was a grounding from within the business where a lot of our employees came forward, and the desire to be able to go to Capitol Hill and fight for change, to put some of our dollars behind marketing for paid leave for all, to end finally the Black maternal mortality crisis. So we created this organization within the business. And we make a commitment that for every marketing campaign and push we do behind our infant formula, we're also pushing for systemic change as well.
Is it wise for entrepreneurs who are kind of entering a totally new industry? You know, you're starting a business that you've never done before, that you don't even really have much experience in. And is it helpful to help you navigate these situations to kind of speak to other founders? And have you done that? And has it been helpful?
You know, in those times of crisis, we actually didn't ask others for their advice, but that would have been a very smart thing to do. But outside of those times of crisis, yes, we are involved in networks like that. And we do get advice from other founders. And it is extremely helpful, especially when we were just starting. Having really good mentors, I think, helped us grow really fast and avoid some other mistakes that could have happened, or at least take better advantage of opportunities that came up. And so I would definitely recommend doing that, even when there are industries that don't seem that related. I mean, even after this, I'm like, I kind of want to talk to Laura more. Seems like she knows how to run this thing and better prepare for moments of crisis.
Anytime you call me.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, definitely recommend doing that. There's a lot you can learn. Our business is primarily a D2C e-commerce business. So I also think you can learn a lot from other e-commerce businesses, even if they're wildly different subjects and industries.
And then to whatever degree you can kind of prevent a future crisis from really, taking the wind out of your sails in the future, like what are you doing differently now? Or, so in the case of Bobby, Laura, I understand that you all have acquired another company.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is you don't want the same mistake to happen again. So it was very clear to us if there was another shortage, and to be clear, we're still one bacteria away from this potentially happening again in the country. We looked at this and we said the only way to solve for it was to grow our manufacturing base. So we did. We bought manufacturing in the heartland of America in Ohio, and it will allow us to triple our capacity and serve close to 15% of babies in the US. And if we get to that point and we still need more, well, then we're having a different conversation. But hopefully we're good if we ever hit this again.
Fantastic. And Justine, anything else you're doing differently?
Yeah, that's amazing. Definitely, going heavy on SOPs. We're entering a period of growth where we're starting to hire more internally. And that becomes even more important, that everything is documented and that everyone, now that all the knowledge is not just contained to me and my husband, we need to know how everything is done in the event that something happens. We'll be able to backtrack, figure out where things went wrong. We also regularly do postmortems. Never done a pre-mortem. I'm like, maybe we should be doing that too. And we also do retrospectives regularly. So that's sort of just like on a regular cadence, different sub-teams and the overall leadership team will meet to discuss like what went well, what didn't go well. And obviously things like this, if there was some big manufacturing mishap, will get discussed and figure out how to make sure we prevent that from happening in the future. I guess like our mantra is mistakes inevitably happen, and that's okay. And like, we never put the blame on any person, right? The way I think of it, again, going back to UX design, is like, we just have to design a robust enough system. And where in the system did it fail? And then we'll just try another way to set up the system to make sure that we don't have the same holes and we won't make the same mistakes again.
I love that, Justine. And it seems like a really mentally healthy way to approach challenges too. I'm curious, like, We've talked about communicating with your customers. We talked about how to reshape your supply chain after a crisis. But what about yourself? Like when you hit this sort of moment of crisis as a leader, like how do you then like rebound from it? Because it is stressful. It is taxing on you. Do you have any wisdom to share there, things you've learned?
Oh my God, there's so many different things. You need to pump yourself up every single day as a founder of a company, and even more so during a crisis. I mean, a few things besides turning to whiskey and some chocolate chips, which is often my go-to. I actually do turn to a Rolodex of mentors. And, I've got the people I turn to that are really just a pep talk to be able to boost me up. Or sometimes it's folks who I know who've gone through very similar issues and can help me see that like transformation is on the other side. And I think it really is just continuing to have that voice in your ear, whether it's in your own head and you're doing it or from someone else, to remind you that there is light at the other end and to just keep going.
Similarly, I think that how you as the founder or like C-level person, however the leader reacts is how the rest of the organization is going to react. So you have to keep your cool. At least at the Wibbles, we want to model the whole, like, we're not going to single someone out and like put the blame on people because that doesn't help anyone. We're very like, how do we solve the problem? Like, let's put our energy on solving the problem. And I think the other thing that helps is I'm lucky I have a co-founder. I definitely recommend co-founders for this reason. My husband is like the most optimistic, positive person, and who, even in these crisis moments will be like, let's figure out a way to solve it and somehow like make it even better. Like turn this crisis moment into an opportunity.
Gotta love the optimism. This is great.
Yes.
Especially in such a down period. So it is important to have that person kind of pump you up. So thank you so much. This has been truly enlightening. Laura and Justine, thank you so much. Christine and I have certainly enjoyed the conversation.
Enjoyed it too. Thanks for having us.
So lovely to chat with you guys.
That's all for today's episode of From the Ground Up.
Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Also, if you liked today's episode or have suggestions of what topics you'd like to hear about, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or reach out to us on Inc.'s social channels on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram.
From the Ground Up is produced by Julia Shu, Blake Odom, and Avery Miles. Mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres. Our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.